So today we have our very last audio video for our Asian art class. Today we're going to finish up Islam by looking at the Ottoman Empire, India, Mughal India, and then a bizarre way we'll finish it all up with a European example. So, of course, the narrative has to start with appropriation. If we're talking about the Ottomans and we're talking about Istanbul, obviously the city has an extremely old history that predates the Muslims. As you all know, Constantinople, Byzantium were leading empires and centers of wealth and education going all the way back to the Greek and Roman eras. So we're going to begin by looking at a Christian cathedral that was built in the 500s. It was called the church, the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, and obviously it served as a prototype for many buildings around the world in the centuries afterwards. So it was a Catholic church in the 500s, and then when the Ottomans came in and conquered what is currently Turkey, and Constantinople became Istanbul, the church was made into a mosque. Actually, structurally, they did nothing to it except the addition of minarets. So it's a curious thing that the Ottomans liked multiple minarets. So we're going to see today some mosques with here 4 minarets. Some even have 6 minarets. Obviously, it is even more luxurious, more embellishment, more monumental. So it's more for visual effect rather than anything spiritual. So the most important aspect of Hagia Sophia is the dome. So the building is unlike the mosques we have seen because it is a cube. So all 4 sides are the same. The distance from corner to corner or each face, the width of each face equals the height of the first floor. It's a dome on a cube. And one of the problems with the construction of Hagia Sophia was that because it was completely constructed out of stone, the dome made out of stone was way too heavy for the walls to support. So the building collapsed just a few years after it was originally constructed. So within the next 15-20 years, they rebuilt it. But you can see on the outside, there's all that additional ugly, boring masonry, stonework, because what you see, that vertical on the right, vertical on the left, attached to the side of the church, all of that is simply to help shore up the walls, give the walls more strength so that they actually can support the stone dome. But the dome over the cube becomes a prototype for much of the Ottoman architecture. So here we're inside. So I want to show this because this is all from the 500s. So a large assembly hall, okay, we've had that before. It is a square ground plan. Okay, so that came from the ancient Roman Empire. They're trying to model this on the Pantheon in Rome, which is a square with a sphere. So you have a first floor where you have the gray stone, a second floor for a balcony so people can watch the services from the second floor. That's also gray stone. And then the stone for the walls with the windows up above, and then the dome we're going to see in the next slide. So this was a functioning cathedral dedicated to Mary, all the way through to from the 500s onward until the introduction of the Ottomans. Now, it is no longer a place of worship. It is only a museum. So it's curious that you can see Islamic elements that reference its role as a mosque, and you also have Catholic elements that represent its time as a cathedral. So hanging from the ceiling, you see these large circles, obviously with words from the Quran. There you have your script. But if you look very closely in this slide, at the far end or in the middle of the slide, you see the altar, the Catholic altar. And if you look inside of that arch above the altar, there's Mary with Christ sitting on her lap. So when the Muslims took over Hagia Sophia, they completely covered all of the images of Mary, Christ, and the various Catholic saints. When it was changed into a museum, when it lost its spiritual religious significance, then they took much of the paint off of the walls and revealed many of the Catholic images. So here we're looking up at the dome. Again, one of the hallmarks of Hagia Sophia and one of the reasons why it was very unstable in its first construction is because it has so many windows. And when you put a lot of windows into a wall, the wall is less sturdy to support a lot of weight. So there are many windows in the side walls. There are windows in the bottom of the dome, and that destabilized the building. So it all, as I said, collapsed. But here you can see in the four corners around the dome, because it's a circle on a square, so you end up with these very awkward corners, you have your Catholic angels, the seraphim, the six-winged angels of Catholicism. So it's curious, you have the seraphim, but then you look at the dome, and in the very middle of that dome, you have your Arabic script from the Quran. So it's this very odd juxtaposition. So we talked last time about, the Alhambra in Granada. We talked about the mosque in Cordoba, obviously, visiting Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. This is one of the major tourist attractions in the entire world. So here we have one of the mosaics that have survived during all of these years of being covered up during Muslim prayer. So here we have Mary with Christ with two saints who offer the city and who offer the church and to honor the religion. So all of these things survive. So again, another monument that truly represents appropriation. So the reason why I begin with Hagia Sophia is that the Ottomans decided we're just going to copy Hagia Sophia. So the first thing, let's make that into a mosque. It's already a freestanding building and no Catholics need it anymore. So then they decide, oh, we like the style. It'll be distinctive to us. It'll be unique to the Ottomans. So therefore, they just repeat it over and over again. So that whole sense of adopting and adapting various current monuments and artistic traditions for your own self-identity. So one of the cities is Edirne, which is in the area of Thrace. So that is Turkey once you cross the Bosporus, very close to Bulgaria and Greece. So this is one of the first structures that they built outside of Istanbul. So again, it is the cube with the dome. In this case, many domes rather than one principal one, but there you have your multiple minarets as well. So here we're inside of the mosque at Edirne, and it's very much a copy of Hagia Sophia. It's not the small little columns that we saw in Spain or we saw in other countries. These are huge. They're not columns anymore. We call them a pier, P-I-E-R. It's these heavy vertical supports. It's not just one skinny little rounded column. Columns originally developed out of, it was supposed to look like a tree trunk. Tree trunks support the ceiling in your house. So, but this is much more massive because of the tremendous weight of the building materials. You see a consistency in color here. So the walls have been painted white with some edge shading. So you have some contouring of the edges in dark brown and black and a little bit of gold to give more articulation to the shapes, the geometric shapes of the columns, of the piers, excuse me, as well as of those arches. The arches are more from Central Asia and Persia, is that pointed arch. So again, it shows that it's really the Seljuk Turks who founded the Ottoman Empire. So here we have another image. So again, the sense of the very large pier, the very thick supports that go up into arches that span large spaces that again help with accommodating large crowds and a very good traffic flow. So because those piers are so big and heavy and the arches are so wide, you get a lot of light coming into these buildings. And that's how it is different from the mosques in Africa, the mosques in Persia, the mosques in Samarkand and Bokhara, all the places we saw. It is using this architectural concept coming from Hagia Sophia, the importance of windows, the importance of the weight distribution of the building onto these support structures that really makes it more airy, more light, more light-filled. As you see here, you have windows in each one of those little domes. You have windows on the walls. So this is what makes Ottoman mosques distinctive. Okay, so let's go back to Istanbul. So we have four mosques that were built in the 1500s, emulating this architectural style. They are all attributed to an architect. So in this case, we have an architect's name. His name was Sinan, so that's even used here. Sinan lived in the 1500s, was responsible for all of these mosques that are in some way an appropriation of Hagia Sophia. He was a Christian boy. I don't know if he was originally Armenian, but a Christian boy who was orphaned and therefore became a ward of the state. For non-Muslims who were not non-Muslim children who were without parents, they could not be adopted. And for those who were of exceptional talent or seemed that they would become very smart, they were taken over by the government. The government ran really excellent orphanages for non-Muslim children. So they had the best of education. They had the best teachers. They had, good food, clothing. They had everything. They were very well taken care of. So this is the environment in which Sinan grew up. And in 1538, he actually became the chief architect of the Ottoman Empire. So these Christian boys who grow up in these orphanages actually became very important leaders in various industry sectors within Istanbul. So we're looking at some of these mosques. Fortunately, there has been very little change in the decoration or the design in the 500 years since. So you always recognize the shape of the minaret. You see the dome over the cube. And depending on the size of the mosque, you have other little domes, as we saw in Edirne, other little domes or other little buildings around the perimeter wall. So here we have the courtyard. We have people there at those faucets. As they're washing their hands, they're washing their feet before they enter into the mosque. It's the exact same format. You have your courtyard, you have your columns, you have your arches, a little area for shade, although it's not so pivotal in the climate of Istanbul. And here we're looking straight on the other side of that, the pavilion for washing, you have your entry into your mosque, and you see the domes behind. So here we have the large interior space, the assembly hall, and this is what I was talking about a moment ago, that with those very large, thick supports, you're able to carry a tremendous amount of weight on fewer supports. It's much more efficient. And those supports can carry the arches much higher. So if you have these huge supports, you're taking some of the weight distribution off of the walls and other traditional parts. So again, you can have more windows, more light coming in. And in this case, you can see that these mosques can actually accommodate thousands of people. So there you see them coming for prayer. But it's a very open space. From the outside, it looks very heavy, very massive. These mosques are not for external beauty, they're for the internal experience. So here, without the people, we're in the open area. You see there are windows on every single level, windows above the minbar, windows above the mihrab arch, windows upon windows, windows in the little half domes in the corners, quarter domes, windows at the base of the big dome up above. So a tremendous amount of variety. So other countries, the interior decoration, the aesthetic is based on the arabesque versus the geometric versus the script, the surface, and is the surface flat, two-dimensional, or does the surface have some relief qualities to it that give visual variety? Here, it's the contrast between wall versus window. So the wall becomes the relatively dark, solid part, where the window becomes the transparent, high value, bright contrast. It's also interesting that being that these are built in the 1500s, they have stained glass. So again, an appropriation from many of the European churches and cathedrals from the Gothic era onward that use colored glass. So even that tradition is being used here. Remember, Istanbul always had extremely close trade and political connections with Italy, with Venice, with various areas throughout all of Europe. So therefore, appropriation on many different levels is possible. So here we have Suleiman's Mosque, and again, here we got 4 minarets. The minarets are around the courtyard, not around the building. So the courtyard is a large space on one side, that obviously where you enter, and then we have the building behind. Because these are extra tall, they were to be seen from quite a distance, even from across the Bosporus. So it's a large dome over a cube, but it's like the main dome is a half dome with quarter domes and other domes. So it's like a big dome with all these little baby domes coming around in order to even create more light and fill up more of that space and channel more of that weight from the center point. You may say, oh my gosh, that looks like one of those Hindu temple shikaras, those towers. Remember we saw at Khajuraho, you had the main tower shape, and then it's like you had all the baby towers, all the half towers that were like clustered around the main one. In a way, it is a very similar design concept, but in Hindu temple architecture, it is done simply for design. Here, it's actually done for technological engineering purposes. They actually do help to channel the weight distribution from the main dome into the walls. So they have a function in terms of supporting the building. They're not just for visual effect, because actually from the ground, you can't even see them. So here we're looking inside. Again, these are examples that are whitewashed, so it's white paint. You have some zebra striping of the white and the red. Where did we see that before? We saw that in Spain at the mosque in Cordoba. I also have to say that in the Romanesque time period in France, there were many cathedrals that had that type of zebra striping on the arches. So maybe that's another appropriation from Catholic churches in Europe. So that wide open space, very thick, heavy supports to channel the weight and open up the inside space. So in those corners between the arches, you see circles with script, circles with arabesque. You have a little bit of that ornament, but you do not have the hora vacui. So these mosques do not have hora vacui. They don't have that obsession with filling every square millimeter with some level of ornament. It's more open. So you have large areas of just white wall, and you have just the white, in this case, the clean windows. It doesn't have that obsessiveness because they're relying more on light. So here we just have a little kid running around inside the mosque. But again, it's a little simpler, cleaner. Obviously, the shapes and lines of the arches of the columns that are in the side areas, the cleanness of the zebra striping, all of these elements are very different from what we've seen before. So here we're on the balcony level. You always can walk up to the balcony. We're on the balcony level. Obviously, it's a very, I don't know what type of lens the photographer used, but you're on the balcony looking down. So it's a little scrunched up as you get that distorted view, but everything in the one photographic image. So again, it's to create a wide open interior space without that forest of columns or thick walls like we had elsewhere. And I'm just showing this because you look up and there you have the main dome, that half sphere that sits on the top of the mosque. And then you have these half domes and quarter domes that, as I said, from the outside, help to channel the weight outward and downward. So it's all about efficiency of weight distribution in order to introduce more windows. And the last mosque we're looking at from Istanbul is the blue mosque because the roof is blue. So again, you have your large half dome and then these other half domes and quarter domes all the way around. So in this case, you have the minarets around the actual mosque building itself. So here we're looking from another angle. So we have 4 minarets around the main mosque building and 2 minarets in front of the courtyard. So here we have the courtyard, wide open space. You still have the rows of columns for the shading. So that goes all the way around. And then you have your main portal, your main E1 going into the building itself. So again, here we are, the wide open space and the very, very thick piers that support the weight. In this case, it is much more hora vacui in terms of surface decoration. The lower level is the plain stone, but as we get a little higher, it's as if every surface of the building, from the piers to the arches, to the half domes, to the quarter domes, all the way around is covered with the arabesque, the vegetation, as well as other abstract images. And what the Blue Mosque is very well known for is the stained glass windows. So here you can see more color and more variety as they introduce a new decorative aspect to traditional Islamic art. So here again we have a view of the stained glass windows, and you have the old-fashioned lanterns hanging from the ceiling as we've seen before. So they try to keep many of the old elements of the 1500s, but obviously all of those light fixtures have been electrified. They all work on electricity. You don't have gas lamps in these buildings anymore. So when you're in Istanbul, you not only go to those mosques, and they're more or less within walking distance of each other, they're all in the old town, but you also go to Topkapi Palace. It's a large palace complex that was also built during the Ottoman Empire. Started in this era, but it's mostly much later. So it was used all the way through these centuries till the demise of the Ottoman Empire. So it's a very vast complex. So here we have one of the old sections that correspond to what we're looking here today. So the columns, the porch, a little bit of ceramic tile you see on the far left. Again, you have the geometric, the various patterns. There's quite a bit of wood construction from the Ottoman time, obviously because the climate is less severe. So you walk around the palace complex and you see, a residential areas as well as the more political rooms of state. So some of these areas are very highly decorated. You have the grill over the windows. That is, again, very similar to patterns we have seen elsewhere. You have the ceramic tiles on the walls that we saw in Samarkand. We had that all through the Seljuk, even in Persia, even in Spain. So that becomes a universal design element, regardless of the specific ethnicity of the local population. And again, it is the geometric, the vegetal. As a house, in this slide, obviously we don't have script from the Quran. And here we have some of the doorways. Here we have script over the doorways. But it's a very interesting combination because Istanbul is always looking east and west. It prides itself as a European city, but it really is very Middle Eastern and it's also very Asian. So here we have two doors, and the doors are completely in a European design in terms of the way the flowers and the fruits are decorated, the way the panels are decorated. That's completely European. But then we have this Arabic script up above. We have the blue and white tiles on the sides. And then we have other gold ornaments on the door frames, the door posts, even on the bottom of the left and the right, that are very much like Rococo 18th century French, very much of a hybrid of various styles. So that sense of a hybrid was intentionally to show the international sophistication of the Ottoman Empire, as well as to show the Ottomans' international mindset, global mindset. It also was obviously a sign of wealth because, to have European-style doors in your house or European-style furniture in your house was something very exotic, so that added to the opulence of the environment. So what you see here is obviously a combination. This is a part of their living room. So you have a couch there on the far side. But again, some of it is European, some of it is Asian, some of it is Persian, some of it is North African. It's a whole mixture of everything we have seen. Okay, so there are two things to know about Ottoman. The first is their mosques look different because it's an appropriation of a Catholic church that was sitting in Istanbul going all the way back to the 500s. So that is distinctive for the Ottomans. This is something else that is distinctive. They do add one new visual element to the decorative vocabulary of Islam. So in this slide, we see ceramic tiles. Look at the flower forms and look at the leaf forms. They do look different than the very abstract, simplified, thin elements we've seen in other countries. But the distinctive quality of the Ottoman plants, the flowers and the leaves, is their edges. They have feathery edges, like feathers. They have very fuzzy edges, the edges of the leaves, the edges of the plants. That is only Ottoman. That is only Turkish. And the name of it is saz. S-A-Z-Z. Saz. So that is the word we use to describe the feathery edged flower, the feathery edged leaf. Maybe this is easier to see here. Look at the leaf. In a way, it is like an edge of the Chinese Christmas tree clothing, or we discussed before the fishtail. It has that quality to it. But every little edge of a leaf, of a flower, whatever the form is, it has that feathery quality. And that, as I said, is distinctive to Ottoman. So if you are looking at a rug, a plate, a vase that is old, and you see that type of feathery edge line, you know it was made in Turkey. And the last image I want to show from Turkey is this manuscript illumination, but it is the logo of Suleiman. So this is a logo. And I like it just because in many classes we talk about graphic design and computer-generated images, and we talk about branding and marketing and the importance of logos. So this is the hand-drawn logo for Suleiman. So you see a beautiful sense of movement and flow. It really is gorgeous. But it's interesting also because within the body of those letters, internally within those letters, you have your arabesque, you have your vine scrolls, you have your abstracted flower. So like within the border of those lines, you have your horror vacui, you have your Persian style of design. And I like that in the bottom left of the image, it's like it spills out. It's flowing out onto the page. There is additional energy, additional power that cannot be contained by that blue border, and it spills out. So it's asymmetrical, it is unbalanced, it is the sense of rocking, rolling, flowing shapes, counterbalancing, but it really is extremely nicely done. So the last country I want to show, because we've been dealing with it throughout the whole semester, is India. So Islam came to India in the 800s. But Islam never reached majority status in India. At most, it only reached 25% of the population. So Islam has always been a minority religion in India. Though when you're dealing with over 1 billion people and 25% are Muslim, you're still talking about a huge population. So especially in the northern areas, that is Rajasthan. So when we're looking at Delhi and Agra, Udaipur, Jaipur, again, some of the most popular tourist sites, this was the center point of the Islamic Mughal court in India. So I'm showing here not mosques, I am showing tombs. So this is the tomb of Humayun. It is on the way to Agra. It's slightly outside of Agra where the Taj Mahal is located. And the question is, what's similar to other Islamic buildings in other countries? So at this point, you should be able to recognize, oh, that part looks Islamic, that looks Islamic, and so forth, because of the transmission of these basic building structures and shapes throughout Dar al-Islam, from Morocco and Spain all the way to Indonesia. So you have the basic color contrast. Remember in Iran, it was the orange color of the brick and stone against the blue of the tiles. here again, it is the natural color of the stones. So they're using two colors of stones, using pink stone and they're using white marble. So that contrast in and of itself creates a lot of visual energy. So you have the white as an outlining element, so that stone is used as a contour, as an edge. And even within like the verticals and horizontals, it breaks down large boring areas into like rectangles and squares and other geometric forms against, again, high value against the lower value. The warm color of the building, obviously against the gardens. Gardens are a part of the design of such a structure. So the warm pink against the green gardens, obviously that helps to make the impact. You have your big dome, you have your Iwan, remember the IWAN, you have the Iwan in the front, and then you have the big dome with smaller domes left and right. Again, it's not a mosque, so you don't have minarets, it's not a mosque, this is a tomb. So the Mughals reigned from the 1500s into the 1800s in India. And obviously one of the most famous of all the Mughal leaders was Akbar. So here we have a portrait of the Mughals, and we can see there he is, very richly attired. But we've already looked at this Indian art style. So the edge shading around the arms, the edge shading around his jaw, the shading in his hair, some slight in his hand, the palm of his hand. So this is Rajasthan. So again, the painters are the same, whether they're painting for the Hindus or whether they're painting for the Muslims. They're using some of the same concepts. Now, obviously, issues such as ornament and decoration are going to be different because of the different tastes of the patrons. So now we get into the Taj Mahal. Again, it is not a mosque, it is a tomb. So here we have, this is for the wife. This was a building dedicated to the memory of the wife. So she is buried in there. So you actually do see her coffin. So it's the wife is Mumtaz Mahal, so that's why it's called the Taj Mahal. In a way, it looks like minarets, so they're copying some elements, but simply for decorative effect. Again, it is all made of white marble, but typical for Islamic cultures, they're going to play with texture, they're going to play with relief surfaces, and obviously they're going to maximize the effect of the natural sunlight to give a lot of different shades on the surface of the building. So some areas look bright white, some look more gray, and some look even darker, depending on the depth of the shadows. So here we're a little closer. So again, it's a very light color stone. From some angles it looks white, and this angle it looks a little more beige. But you see that there's an inset of black lines. So it's that sgraffito again, that like etching into the surface, but also with some little bits of black stone, almost like the mosaic black stone that is fitted into these engraved lines in order to give some more contrast. So as you see right above the main doorway, there's your arabesque. There is your vine scroll. And then in the border around it, there you have your script. Then in the horizontal on top of the roof line, there's your geometric. So it's still the same visual vocabulary, but trying to address a different design concept. So here we have the interior. So here's actually the tomb of the wife. So even look at the surface of her tomb. It's the arabesque, it's the geometric, it's the abstraction of the flowers. Look at the floor. The floor is the same pattern we saw in Samarkand and in Persia. You look at the walls, there's a slight sense of horror vacui. where we either have texture or else we have inlaid design or engravings. So even though it's all one color stone, you have a tremendous amount of different, you know, elements on the gray scale, from bright white through all the grays into areas that look quite black. So we'll look at one more manuscript, and this is not Akbar, but one of the following of the Mughal rulers. This is Jahangir. And it's curious. Okay, so there he is in the middle. First, we'll do the narrative. So there he is in the middle, and we see various dignitaries, worldly dignitaries, who are coming to meet him. This is fictional. It's not a historical document of an actual moment in time. So there he is seated on a raised platform. It looks like he's seated on an hourglass. Who's that at the bottom of the hourglass? Two little European-style winged cherubs, winged children, like from some Catholic painting. So he is presenting a book to a Sufi. So a Sufi was like a religious man, like a superintendent of a family shrine. So it shows that he is preferring a Sufi to these other men who are offering him their respect. So who are these other people? The Sufi is the one standing with a long white beard and the Persian style hat. The next person that we see in profile is the Turkish Sultan. The next person going down is King James II of England, or King James I of England. And then the man in the bottom left corner is going to be the artist himself with a portrait he created. So is there a narrative here that the ruler respects religion more than political heads of state? Religion is more important? Maybe. So the spiritual over worldly glory. And the fact that he is sitting over an hourglass means your time is running out, time is passing, and you better do good while you're alive. You're not going to live forever, so leave a good legacy right now. So it's an odd mixture of East and West. That narrative of memento mori, this goes all the way back to ancient Rome. This is all Latin. So in a memento mori narrative, it is that you should be aware that life is not forever, and you must do your best while you're on planet Earth. You must focus more on your spiritual well-being than the accumulation of territory, political power, or any other type of luxuries or money. So at the very top, there are two European cupids flying in the air. Looks like one has Cupid's arrows and the other one is hiding its face. Then you have script, Arabic script above and below. You have your geometric border with, again, some arabesques. And that's a European band of white, blue, red, and pink flowers. Very much of a hybrid. But these courts aspired to be global and international. And as England started to trade with all countries around the world in order to start establishing its Commonwealth, the sun never sets on the British Empire, that rulers who are receptive to westernization and global economies obviously embrace this Western art as well as Western ideologies. So here are the detail. We have the two little European babies in the sky. We have him giving the gift to the religious man rather than the political rulers. And we have the angels at the bottom who are counting the sands of the hourglass. That's interesting, very interesting. So this well leads to the next slide. So I'm ending the course by looking at a building in England. It is called Brighton Pavilion, and it was built by John Nash, an Englishman, at the beginning of the 1800s. It was built from 1815 to 1822. It is like a summer home. It was a vacation retreat for the British royal family. So Brighton is on the coast of the English Channel, and this is where they would come from time to time to be on the coastline. But it's anything but normal, especially being that it is in England. So it is an odd combination of everything we saw this semester. Maybe first you see the Islamic domes, maybe you see the minarets, which actually are fireplaces. But those domes are those British Amalakas from southern India. Maybe it's that onion shape dome that we saw in some other cultures. It's a very much people refer to it as like Disney World or Las Vegas. It is the ultimate concept of appropriation for simply the sake of having fun with it. So here we have a detail of the exterior of the pavilion at Brighton. And let's first look at the main entryway, that projecting rounded area. So you have your columns. What's between the columns? It is a weaving almost. That comes from India. We saw that with Sanchi and Barhoot. That is the type of wooden, not gate, but a wooden screen that would be in front of the balconies. We saw it from the very earliest BC era. So that's borrowed from India. So that onion dome we saw in several different cultures. The minaret is Muslim. Maybe these look a little more Ottoman rather than Persian or from other countries. Here we're inside looking at the dining room. The paintings are like European versions of Chinese figures. The border decoration looks very Chinese. The light fixtures hanging from the ceiling, some bizarre mixture of some fantasy of dragon wings, bird wings, composite creatures. So everything within this is a cut and paste of an Asian shape, line, abstraction, an odd, bizarre adaptation of an Asian figure, ethnicity issues. You know, nowadays people say, oh, appropriation is like stealing somebody else's heritage. It's like a political taboo. You are disrespecting the Chinese, so you're disrespecting the Indians or disrespecting Muslims if you use something from one of their mosques in order to design your chair or your table or the frame of your painting. So here we have one of the long corridors within Brighton Pavilion. Look at those columns. It's really very dynamic, very interesting. The top looks like an umbrella. To me, it looks like an umbrella. Is that the hood of the Nagaraja that is over the Buddha with little bells hanging? That's obviously Chinese. The column with the snake writhing, twisting up the column, is that from Shiva, from Hinduism? So you look at this and you start thinking, I've seen that before, and would they have taken like that cord that goes diagonally across Shiva's body and use that in a column decoration? You have your horror vacui, you look around the doors and that sense of obsessive decoration of the 2D, that's obviously Islamic. So there's just so much here. So here we have one of the large meeting rooms. The light fixtures obviously are very, very creative. People think they look like bat wings. So something like Art Nouveau would do 100 years later. But above on the left is the fireplace with a large mirror on top of it. And the summit of the mirror is a Chinese pagoda roofline, a Chinese temple roofline. And to the left and the right, those look like pagodas. Those two freestanding objects look like pagodas. So here, one of the best of the lighting fixtures, this one inhabited by a dragon. It's beautiful the way his tongue comes out and becomes an arabesque line, the scaling of his body, the rippling, almost wave-like movement of the scales from his neck over to the top of his head, the contrast of the metal with that red, almost enamel lacquer to give that contrast. The sense of the spiraling movement of the snake tail of the dragon. And then these palm trees, the palm leaves up above from which he is suspended. So maybe this is Vishnu's Maya. Maybe this is the other world. Maybe this is what it's about in terms of aesthetics, Asian aesthetics. It is that visualization of something intangible, something beyond. So whether it's Vishnu's Maya, whether it's Buddha's Nirvana, or whether it is the inversimilitude and abstraction of paradise imagery for the Muslims. They're always reaching for an alternative reality, a virtual reality in which ordinary humans do not exist. It's another reality where the gods reside or the gods may not reside, but the artists are like clairvoyants. They are, as we say from the 1970s, the artists are like tour guides who take us into other realms, other places, other spaces that we do not encounter in our daily lives. So that's obviously a main difference between Asian artists and European or Western artists. But it gives us a tremendously rich imagery and an infinite possibilities of design and color and aesthetic concepts in order to represent that other world, that other reality, because it is not bound by the rules and regulations that govern the earth and the world in which we live. Okay, so that is our last lecture. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. So now we'll go back to synchronous sessions. Thank you.